The first time I saw Walter Reed get humiliated, I honestly thought the old man was going to have a heart attack right there in the hallway. Not because he looked weak, but because of the way everybody suddenly went quiet, like an entire building realized at the exact same moment that something terrible had just happened. And the crazy part was, our new CEO had no idea she'd just lit the match that would burn her own empire to the ground. See, people think companies collapse because of competition or bad markets or lawsuits. But sometimes all it takes is one arrogant person walking into a room convinced they're smarter than the people who built the place in the first place. Back then I worked for a medical robotics company outside Denver called Syntec Dynamics. On paper, it looked like one of those unstoppable American success stories. Sleek glass building, million-dollar contracts, investors throwing money at us every quarter, magazine articles calling us the future of biotech manufacturing. But inside the building, everybody knew the real reason Syntec worked, and his name was Walter Reed. Walter was 72 years old, half blind in one eye, walked with metal braces strapped to both legs after an accident years ago, and spoke so softly you sometimes had to lean forward just to hear him. But the man was a genius, not the fake Silicon Valley kind that posts inspirational quotes online. I mean the real kind, the kind that could stare at a broken machine for 10 seconds and somehow already know which microscopic component had failed. Most of the automation systems inside Syntec existed because Walter designed them 20 years earlier in a tiny garage workshop before the company was even profitable. The engineers worshipped him, the technicians trusted him more than management, and even clients asked for him by name during tours. He never acted important, though. Every morning he rolled into the building at exactly 6:15 a.m. carrying the same beat-up leather satchel, and stopping at the vending machine for peanut butter crackers and black coffee that smelled like burnt asphalt. He'd sit with us in the cafeteria sometimes and tell these dry little stories about old engineering disasters that always somehow turned into life lessons. Machines, he once told me, are honest, people aren't. At the time, I thought he was just being cynical. Later, I realized he was warning me. Things changed when Syntec's founder retired after a stroke, and the board hired Vanessa Crowe as the new CEO. Vanessa looked like she'd been manufactured in a corporate laboratory somewhere. Expensive suits, perfect blonde hair, teeth so white they almost looked fake. Always carrying a tablet like she was about to fire somebody through email while standing right in front of them. From day one, she acted like the company needed to be modernized, which basically meant destroying every system that already worked so she could put her fingerprints on it. Meetings tripled overnight. Entire departments got reorganized for no reason. Managers who'd been there 15 years suddenly had 23-year-old consultants telling them how to do their jobs. And for some reason, Vanessa hated Walter almost immediately. Nobody understood why. Maybe she saw him as a symbol of the old leadership. Maybe she didn't like how respected he was. Or maybe people like Vanessa just can't stand someone who earns authority naturally because they spend their whole lives forcing it. Either way, the tension kept building until one Tuesday afternoon when half the office heard shouting coming from the executive hallway. I remember looking up from my workstation and seeing people slowly stepping out of their offices like neighbors hearing gunshots outside. Vanessa's voice echoed through the corridor, sharp enough to cut steel. "You sit here all day pretending to work while everyone else carries this company on their backs," she snapped. "I don't care what arrangements the old administration made for you. Those days are over." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Walter's voice came quietly through the doorway. Calm, almost tired. "You should really review my contract before you do something reckless." Vanessa actually laughed. Not nervous laughter either, the kind people use when they think they've already won. "Contract," she said. "Walter, this isn't 1985 anymore. We have software now. We don't need relics hanging around collecting sympathy paychecks." And that's when every single person in that hallway realized she had absolutely no clue who she was talking to. Walter didn't even argue with her after that. That was the part that unsettled everybody the most. He just sat there quietly in his wheelchair while Vanessa kept tearing into him like she was trying to perform for the managers standing nearby. "You think this company owes you loyalty because you've been here forever?" she said. "Nobody is irreplaceable." Walter adjusted his glasses, folded a few papers into his satchel, then looked up at her with this expression I still can't fully describe. Disappointment maybe, but deeper than that, like a parent watching a child play with gasoline. "Ms. Crowe," he said softly. There's a difference between authority and understanding. You only have one of them. That line spread through the building in less than an hour. By sunset, everybody knew Walter Reed had been fired. Security escorted him downstairs, even though the man could barely walk without assistance. I'll never forget that image. The rain outside hitting the glass doors while Walter slowly rolled toward the exit carrying 30 years of his life in one bag. And Vanessa standing upstairs watching from the balcony with her arms crossed like she'd just conquered something. Some people clapped when she walked back into the executive wing later that afternoon. Not because they supported her, because terrified employees sometimes applaud the person holding the knife. But down in engineering, people were furious. One technician named Luis punched a vending machine so hard he split 2 knuckles open. Another woman locked herself in a restroom crying because Walter had mentored her through chemotherapy while she worked there. That's who he was. The company didn't just lose an engineer that day. It lost the moral center holding the place together. And Vanessa still didn't understand what she'd done. 3 days later, the disaster started. At first, it looked small. One production line shut down unexpectedly because a calibration system failed. Then another machine stopped communicating with the servers. Then an entire diagnostics wing froze during a client demonstration while investors stood there watching screens flash error messages. Managers panicked. IT blamed engineering. Engineering blamed operations. Operations blamed software vendors. Meanwhile, Vanessa stormed around the building screaming at department heads, demanding explanations nobody could give. Then came the meeting. God, I wish I could have recorded that meeting. Every executive, senior engineer, legal advisor, and board representative got dragged into the conference room on the top floor. I wasn't supposed to be there, but my supervisor pulled me in because our division was directly affected. Vanessa walked in furious, slamming a folder onto the table. I want answers, she snapped. Why are systems suddenly failing across multiple departments? Nobody spoke for a second until the company lawyer, an exhausted man named Elliot Grayson, slowly removed his glasses and rubbed his face like he hadn't slept in days. Because, he said carefully, Walter Reed owns the patents. The room went silent. Vanessa blinked. Excuse me. Elliot slid a stack of contracts across the table. The robotics framework, the automation modules, the neural calibration systems. Walter patented them personally before Syntec expanded. The company operated under licensing agreements tied to his employment contract. Vanessa frowned like somebody had spoken another language. So transfer them. Elliot looked physically uncomfortable. We can't. Why not? Because the agreement required voluntary transfer upon retirement, not termination. You could actually feel the oxygen leave the room. One board member muttered, "Oh my God." Another just stared at Vanessa like she'd driven a car through his house. Elliot continued speaking, slower this time. By terminating Mr. Reed without cause, Syntec immediately lost legal rights to continue operating any system attached to those patents. Vanessa shook her head. No, that's ridiculous. He built those systems for this company. He built them before this company. Elliot corrected quietly. And legally, they belonged to him. That was the moment everything changed. Within 48 hours, entire departments shut down. Equipment had to be disconnected to avoid intellectual property violations. Contracts worth millions got frozen overnight. Investors started calling nonstop, demanding answers. Clients threatened lawsuits. Employees whispered in hallways like people trapped inside a sinking ship, pretending not to notice water rising around their ankles. And Walter? Walter disappeared completely. Vanessa tried damage control immediately. First came the emails praising Walter's legacy contributions. Then flower baskets showed up at his house. Then she offered him a consulting contract reportedly worth 7 figures. He refused every single attempt. One executive claimed Walter responded to the final offer with only one sentence. You mistook kindness for dependence. About a week later, the Real bomb dropped. Syntec's largest competitor, a rapidly growing biotech firm in Seattle called Norvale Systems, announced a new partnership with legendary robotics pioneer Walter Reed. The entire industry exploded. Financial blogs covered it within hours. Stock prices shifted overnight. Former Syntec clients suddenly started migrating toward Norvale because wherever Walter went, innovation followed. People at our office looked physically sick reading the news. I remember standing beside Luis in the break room while he stared at the television mounted above the vending machines. She handed him to the competition, he whispered. She literally gift-wrapped him. But Walter wasn't done. About 2 weeks later, Vanessa got hit with a wrongful termination lawsuit, so brutal, it became company folklore. Multiple employees gave statements about the comments she made regarding Walter's disability and age. Apparently, security footage also captured portions of the confrontation outside her office. Once legal got involved, more stories surfaced. Vanessa mocking older employees in meetings, calling veteran engineers obsolete, pushing out long-term staff to replace them with younger hires willing to worship her. Suddenly, the board realized they didn't just have a public relations problem. They had a liability grenade sitting in the CEO office. The tension inside Syntec became unbearable after that. Entire teams started quitting. Recruiters circled the building like vultures. One senior programmer left during lunch and never came back. Another employee printed his resignation letter and taped it directly onto the HR office door. Meanwhile, Vanessa became increasingly unhinged. She started holding these bizarre emergency meetings where she'd rant about loyalty and corporate sabotage while everyone avoided eye contact. One morning, she accused Walter of orchestrating revenge out of personal bitterness, and honestly, that was the first time I ever saw the board openly turn against her. A director named Harold Benton leaned forward slowly and said, "No, Ms. Crow, this is what consequences look like." You could have heard a pin drop after that. And the thing nobody talks about in stories like this is how fast fear spreads through a workplace once people stop believing leadership can protect them. It changes the air. People stop decorating desks. Conversations get quieter. Lunch breaks shorten. Every email feels dangerous. We all knew Syntec was bleeding money by then, but nobody knew how bad it really was until leaked numbers started circulating internally. Tens of millions gone in less than 3 months. Delayed projects. Lost contracts, legal settlements, patent licensing disputes, investor pullouts. It was catastrophic. One bad decision, one moment of arrogance, and an empire started collapsing from the inside out. Then came the night everything finally exploded. The night Syntec finally broke apart didn't happen during some dramatic boardroom showdown, or police raid, or cinematic explosion like people imagine. No, it happened quietly, almost sadly, on a Thursday evening while rain hammered against the windows and half the building sat dark because entire departments had already been shut down to save money. I was packing my things when an emergency company-wide email hit everybody's inbox at exactly 8:17 p.m. Subject line, mandatory executive announcement. You could feel people freezing at their desks reading it. Some employees actually stood up and started walking toward the conference auditorium before they even finished the first paragraph because deep down, we all knew what was coming. Vanessa Crow stood on stage 20 minutes later looking nothing like the polished executive who'd swaggered into the company 3 months earlier. Her hair was a mess, her makeup barely covering the exhaustion underneath her eyes, and for the first time since she arrived, she looked afraid. Behind her sat the board members stiff as statues. One seat remained empty. Harold Benton. Rumor was he'd spent the entire afternoon negotiating emergency investor exits. Vanessa cleared her throat and tried reading from prepared notes, but her voice kept cracking. Due to recent operational restructuring challenges, nobody reacted. Not one person bought the corporate language anymore. Then somebody in the back laughed. Not loudly, just one exhausted little laugh. And weirdly, that made the entire illusion collapse. Vanessa lowered the paper slowly. "Effective immediately," she said quietly. "Syntec Dynamics will suspend all active expansion operations." People started murmuring instantly. A woman near me whispered, "We're done." Another guy just shook his head staring at the floor. Then the real punch landed. "Several divisions," Vanessa continued, "will be permanently dissolved. That's corporate language for your life, just got detonated." Some employees started crying right there. Others immediately pulled out phones, checking job listings under the seats. One engineer I knew named Marcus stood up halfway through the announcement, took off his company badge, dropped it onto the floor, and walked out without saying a word. Nobody stopped him. Honestly, nobody blamed him. But the craziest moment happened after the meeting ended. As people shuffled out quietly like survivors leaving a funeral, I noticed Harold Benton finally entering through a side door, carrying a thick folder under his arm. Vanessa spotted him instantly and rushed over. Even from across the room, you could feel the desperation pouring off her. "Tell me you fixed this," she hissed. Harold just stared at her for a second. "You still don't understand, do you?" he said. Vanessa looked stunned. Walter Reed didn't destroy this company. He pointed around the auditorium at the empty seats, the frightened employees, the executives avoiding eye contact. "You did, the moment you walked in believing respect could be replaced with fear." Then he handed her the folder and walked away. Later we found out the folder contained finalized terms for her resignation. 3 months. That's all it took. 90 days to destroy a company that took decades to build. Vanessa officially stepped down the following Monday, but by then it barely mattered. The damage was irreversible. Investors fled. Departments vanished. People scattered to other companies. Syntec still technically existed for another year after that, but it felt more like watching a dying animal breathe slower every week. And Walter? Funny enough, the man never publicly celebrated any of it. No interviews. No revenge speeches. No smug press conferences. That almost made it more powerful. He just quietly continued working at Norvale Systems where, according to people who followed the industry, he completely transformed their technology division within months. Some former co-workers joined him there too. Luis did. A few senior engineers followed. They said Walter personally requested they be hired because he trusted people who remembered how to build things properly. I never went. By then I was exhausted from the whole corporate nightmare. I took a smaller job at an independent research lab outside Boulder. Less money, way less prestige, but honestly, I sleep better now. Sometimes I still think about Walter though. About that hallway. About the moment Vanessa mistook silence for weakness. Because that's the thing arrogant people never understand. Quiet people are dangerous when they've spent their entire lives building things. They don't need to scream. They don't need attention. They just remove their hands from the foundation, and suddenly everybody realizes what was holding the building up the whole time. Last I heard, Walter finally retired for real at 75. Apparently Norvale threw him this huge private dinner with engineers flying in from all over the country just to thank him. One former coworker told me Walter stood up at the end, looked around the room, and said something that still sticks with me. Never punish the people who carry your future simply because they remind you of your past. Then he sat back down like it was nothing. Honestly, maybe that's the real lesson here. Companies love talking about innovation and leadership and culture, but none of that means a damn thing if the people in charge can't recognize the value of the human beings who actually built the place. So what do you think? Did Walter go too far by refusing to help save Syntec after Vanessa got fired? Or was the company getting exactly what it deserved for standing by while he was humiliated? And if you were in Walter's position, would you have forgiven them? Or burned the whole thing down too? Let me know in the comments, because stories like this always split people right down the middle.